I never meant to fall for the quiet warmth of that house, or the woman who opened its door like she'd been waiting all along. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what does this story feel like to you right now? It had been years since I'd driven this road. The trees were taller now, their branches bending over the asphalt like they were trying to remember me. Even the air smelled the same, a mix of dust, pine, and something faintly sweet from the bakery down the street. I wasn't supposed to be here long. Just a weekend, a quick catch-up with an old friend before heading back to the noise of the city. But the moment I turned onto that familiar street, something in my chest went quiet, like I'd stepped into an old photograph that never stopped waiting. His house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, a little more weathered, but still standing like it always had, pale paint, crooked mailbox, a front porch that creaked in the same spot as before. I parked and sat for a moment, engine humming, just remembering the summers we spent on that porch. The way his mom would call out for us when it got dark. Back then, she was just someone's mom. Kind, strict, always busy. Now, the idea of seeing her again stirred something I couldn't quite name. When the door opened, it wasn't my friend who greeted me. It was her. She looked almost exactly as I remembered, except softer. Not younger, but gentler somehow. Her hair was shorter, flecked with a bit of silver near the temples. There was a steadiness in her eyes that time hadn't touched. She smiled, that same calm, welcoming smile. "You still know your way here," she said. Her voice carried warmth, like the start of a song you haven't heard in years. I told her my friend was expecting me later, that I just wanted to drop off a small gift. She waved it off and told me to come in anyway. The moment I stepped inside, the scent hit me: brewed tea, laundry, something baked earlier that morning. Every corner looked the same: framed family photos, old curtains, sunlight spilling across the wooden floor. Familiar, but heavier now, like it carried all the years we'd missed. We stood in the living room, exchanging polite words, catching up. She asked about work, life, the city, listening with that quiet attention that made you feel seen. Every few seconds, I'd catch myself studying the small changes. The way her hands lingered on the back of a chair, the softness in her movements, the faint weariness beneath her composure. And for a moment I felt out of place. Too grown to be the boy she remembered, too aware to be just another guest. She poured tea, handed me a cup, and smiled again. "You've always had that look," she said. "Like you're carrying too much in your head." I laughed quietly. "Maybe I never learned to put it down." She nodded, understanding. Outside, the late afternoon light turned gold. Inside, the house hummed with quiet memory. I told myself it was just a visit, nothing more. But as she walked ahead to set down the tea, something in the air shifted. I realized it wasn't just the neighborhood I'd come back to. It was her. The next morning, I found myself walking back down that same street, no reason, really. My friend had texted to say he'd be out for a while, and I figured I'd just stop by to say hello again. That's what I told myself. But truthfully, something about that house had pulled me in again. Maybe it was the calm. Maybe it was her voice still echoing faintly in my head. She opened the door before I even knocked twice, as if she'd been expecting someone. "You again," she said, half smiling. "Couldn't stay away?" I shrugged, laughing softly. "Guess I wanted another cup of that tea." "I knew it wasn't the company," she teased. But her eyes said otherwise, warm, kind, curious. We sat in the kitchen, the same table where I'd eaten too many sandwiches as a teenager. The wallpaper had changed, but the rhythm of the space hadn't: the slow ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the muted sound of a radio from the next room. She poured tea with steady hands, and for a few minutes, we filled the silence with light conversation. Work, travel, people we used to know. She told me her son didn't visit much anymore, said he was always busy. She said it like she understood, but I heard the softness in her voice, that quiet ache of someone used to being left behind gently, not intentionally. I caught myself studying her when she spoke. Not the way I used to, not with boyish admiration, but with the stillness of a man realizing that time had only made her presence more grounding. Her hair framed her face differently now, but her smile, that same patient, knowing curve, hadn't changed at all. At one point, she asked, "You ever think about staying? Coming back here for good?" Her tone was casual, but her eyes didn't quite match it. I smiled, stirring the tea I wasn't really drinking. "Sometimes. But it never feels like there's a reason." She nodded. "There's always a reason. You just haven't named it yet." The words hung between us, too deliberate to be accidental. I looked away first, out the window, at the garden she still kept so carefully trimmed. The rain had started again, tapping lightly against the glass. The conversation drifted back to safer topics: my work, her garden, the way the town had changed. But something beneath it had shifted. Every pause, every shared glance carried a weight that hadn't been there before. The kind that doesn't shout or rush, just settles quietly inside you until you can't ignore it. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. The smell of rain drifted in, cool and clean. "Come by any time," she said softly. "I don't get much company these days." I nodded, meaning to say something, but words felt unnecessary. As I stepped into the drizzle, I glanced back once more. She was still standing there in the doorway, her arms folded loosely, eyes thoughtful. And for a moment I knew this wasn't small talk anymore. Dinner wasn't planned. It just happened. My friend had called earlier to say he'd be home late. Work, errands, something that would keep him out past 9. I told him not to worry, that I'd grab a meal somewhere in town. But then she'd said, almost without thinking, "You could eat here. It's just me tonight anyway." Her tone was casual, but her eyes held that small flicker, like she'd surprised even herself by saying it. So I stayed. The kitchen was dim and warm, lit only by the amber glow of a hanging lamp. The air smelled of garlic and soy, the soft crackle of oil in the pan filling the silence between us. I offered to help, but she waved me off with that quiet authority mothers have, gentle but firm. Still, I stayed nearby, leaning against the counter, just watching her move. There was something peaceful in the way she cooked, no rush, no noise. Just calm rhythm, measured gestures, a small hum under her breath. The light caught her profile, the faint crease near her mouth, the soft gleam in her hair. She turned once and caught me watching. "You used to hang around the kitchen like that when you were 16, she said, smiling. "Always waiting for snacks." I chuckled. "Some habits don't change. Maybe some shouldn't," she said quietly, eyes dropping back to the pan. When we sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily. It felt natural, about life, about how quickly years slip past. She asked if I'd ever married. I told her no. She didn't press, just nodded, almost as if she already knew why. I asked if she was still painting. She smiled, that small, inward smile of someone remembering a part of themselves they'd left behind. "Not for a long time. Feels silly now." "Nothing that brings you peace is silly," I said. She looked at me then, really looked, and the moment stretched, fragile and full. After dinner, she reached for the dishes, and I followed her to the sink. The running water was warm, the clinking of plates soft and rhythmic. When our hands brushed under the stream, it was nothing, just a second, a passing touch. But it felt like the air shifted. She froze, barely, before continuing. Neither of us said a word. When we finished, she handed me a towel, our fingers grazing again. "You've changed," she said, voice low. I met her eyes. "So have you." The clock ticked softly in the corner, the house around us still and breathing. Outside, the sky had gone deep blue, that in-between moment when the world holds its breath before night. She walked me to the door, her voice steady but softer now. "Drive safe. It's getting late." I nodded, thanked her, lingered a little too long in the doorway. As I stepped out, the porch light flickered behind me, casting her in that warm, amber glow. She stood there, arms folded, smiling faintly, like she was holding a thought she'd never say out loud. And walking away, I realized it wasn't just memory keeping me here anymore. It was her presence, quiet, steady, and impossible to forget. I told myself I'd only stop by for a minute. I'd left my jacket there the night before, or maybe I just wanted a reason to see her again. Either way, I was back on that familiar doorstep, pretending I didn't notice the flutter in my chest. She opened the door with that same half-smile, one eyebrow raised. "Didn't think I'd see you again so soon," she said. I held up the jacket, sheepish. "Forgot this." "Of course you did," she replied softly. "You always find a reason to come back." Her words landed heavier than they should have, gentle, teasing, but threaded with meaning. We both knew it. I laughed quietly, stepping inside. "Maybe I just like the tea." "Right," she said, smiling, though her eyes lingered on me a beat longer. The air in the house felt different that morning, brighter somehow, but quieter too. Sunlight poured through the window, cutting across the wooden floor in soft lines. She'd been watering the plants. The faint scent of soil and soap hung in the air. We talked as she moved around the room, her presence steady and unhurried. I told her I'd be heading back to the city soon, a few more days, maybe less. She nodded, setting down the watering can. "You always leave just when it starts to feel easy again," she said, almost to herself. I hesitated. "Easy?" She looked at me then, not shyly, not boldly, just openly. "You bring something different into this house," she said. "It's quieter when you're not here. Quieter in a way I don't like." For a moment I didn't breathe. Her voice had softened, cracked just slightly at the edges, not sadness exactly, but truth brushing against the surface. "I didn't mean to make things complicated," I said quietly. "You didn't," she replied. "Life did." We both smiled at that, the kind of smile people use when they're standing too close to something real. She moved to pour tea, her back turned, and I watched her silhouette in the light, calm, deliberate, graceful. There was a stillness in her movements, but underneath it, I sensed the same uncertainty that was knotting my chest. When she handed me the cup, her fingers brushed mine. It was nothing, but it was everything. Neither of us moved for a second. "I don't know what it is about you," she said quietly, "but every time you walk in, it feels like the house remembers how to breathe." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The lump in my throat was too thick for words. We sat across from each other, the morning sunlight between us, both pretending to sip our tea. And in that stillness, between her steady gaze and my restless heartbeat, I realized she wasn't wrong. I did keep finding reasons to come back. Because somehow, somewhere between the silence and the small talk, she'd become the reason. The next few days slipped by quietly. My friend had gone out of town for work, leaving the house emptier than usual. I told myself I was just being helpful, stopping by to check on things, fix the leaky faucet, tighten a few loose screws around the kitchen door. Practical things. Simple, harmless things. She didn't ask me to. But she didn't stop me either. That morning, she'd been in the garden when I arrived. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and jasmine. She wore simple clothes, old jeans, a soft blue shirt, her hair tied back loosely. She looked at me over her shoulder, sunlight catching the curve of her face. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said. "I know," I replied, kneeling by the faucet. "But I like fixing things." She smiled, just a little. "Not everything needs fixing." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, but it wasn't easy either. It was charged, filled with everything we weren't saying. Inside, the house was still. The only sounds were the click of tools and the slow rhythm of her footsteps moving from room to room. Occasionally, she'd bring me a cup of water or stand nearby, talking about small things, the weather, her garden, the neighbor's new dog. But every time our eyes met, it felt like the world slowed, like the walls around us knew something neither of us dared to admit. Later, we sat at the kitchen table again. She poured coffee, her hand steady, her eyes avoiding mine. "It's strange," she said after a while. "When the house is quiet, it feels bigger. But when someone's here, it feels smaller. Safer, maybe." I nodded, fingers tracing the rim of my cup. "I know what you mean." "Do you?" she asked softly, glancing up. I met her gaze, and for a heartbeat, everything else disappeared: the ticking clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, even the sound of our breathing. There was only her, the warmth in her eyes, the calm strength that had always been there, and the tenderness she was trying so hard to hide. I looked away first. "It's getting late. I should go." She didn't argue. Just stood and followed me to the door, as she always did. The evening light was soft, orange and fading. When I turned to say goodbye, she stepped a little closer, not enough to cross the line, just enough for me to feel her presence, the faint warmth of her breath in the cool air. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for fixing things." Her voice trembled slightly on the last word, and for a second, I almost reached for her hand. Almost. But I didn't. Because we both knew what that touch would mean. So I smiled instead, nodded, and stepped out into the fading light. As I walked away, I realized the hardest part of wanting someone you shouldn't isn't in what you say. It's in what you don't. The night before I left, the town felt unusually still. The air was cool, touched with the faint scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. My bags were packed. I told myself I wouldn't stop by again, that leaving quietly would be easier for both of us. But as the evening deepened and the streets turned gold beneath the streetlights, I found myself driving toward her house anyway. No reason, no excuse. Just one last visit before distance made everything simpler again. Her porch light was on. She must have heard the car, because the door opened before I even reached it. "I thought you'd already gone," she said. "I almost did." "Almost," she repeated softly. "You're good at almost." She smiled, but there was no teasing in it this time. Just something tender, tired maybe, but understanding. I told her I wanted to say goodbye properly, that I hadn't been sure I'd get the chance. She nodded, then motioned toward the porch. "Sit with me for a bit," she said. We sat side by side, a careful distance apart. The wooden steps creaked under us, and the night hummed with quiet sounds: cicadas, a distant dog, the whisper of leaves in the wind. The kind of silence that didn't demand filling. After a while, she spoke. "You remind me of him sometimes," she said. "Your father?" I asked. "No," she smiled faintly. "Of my son. When he was still around more. You both have that look, like you're somewhere else, even when you're right here." I didn't know what to say. So I just nodded, staring out into the dark yard. "This place used to be so full," she said quietly. "Now it just echoes." Her voice caught on that last word. I turned, and she was staring at her hands clasped in her lap. Something inside me broke a little. "You've kept it beautiful," I said softly. She looked up. "Beauty doesn't keep you company." There it was, the truth neither of us had wanted to touch. The loneliness beneath her calm, the way I kept returning not just to her, but to the peace she carried. Without thinking, I reached out, my hand brushed hers. She didn't move away. Her fingers were cool, delicate, steady. The kind of touch that asked for nothing and said everything. We stayed like that for a moment, saying nothing. Just breathing in sync, both aware that this was as close as we'd ever be allowed to get. Then she gently pulled her hand back and looked at me with that quiet, resigned kindness. "Take care of yourself," she whispered. Her voice trembled slightly. "And don't make a habit of coming back just to say goodbye." I smiled, but it faltered halfway. The porch light flickered once, and for a second, I saw her the way I'd always remember her, calm, strong, standing in the soft halo of amber light, holding every unspoken thing between us like it was something sacred. As I walked away, the night felt heavier than it should have. Because this time, leaving didn't feel like distance. It felt like loss. It had been months since I left. The city swallowed me up again, the noise, the pace, the constant motion. Days bled into nights, and the rhythm of work took over like nothing had ever interrupted it. But every now and then, usually when the world slowed, in the pause between phone calls, or walking home after dark, I'd catch myself thinking of her. Not in the way you think of someone you've lost, but in the quiet, steady way you remember a place that once felt like home. One afternoon, I had to drive through the old town again. Business, just a meeting outside the city. I told myself I wouldn't stop, that it was better to keep moving, to let memories stay where they belong. But when I reached that familiar turn, my hands moved on their own. The street hadn't changed much. Same rows of trees bending over the pavement, same pale house at the end of the cul-de-sac. I slowed the car but didn't stop, just enough to look. She was there. In the front yard, wearing a sun hat, pruning the same small garden she'd tended every year. The afternoon light touched everything gold, the edges of her hair, the soft lines on her face, the quiet grace in her movements. She looked peaceful. Not waiting. Not lonely. Just herself. For a moment, it felt like time folded back. Like nothing had ended, it had just changed shape. As I drove past, she lifted her head. Maybe she heard the car, maybe she just felt it. That small intuition people have when someone they once knew is near. Her eyes met mine briefly. She smiled. Not surprised, not startled. Just a soft, knowing smile, like she understood everything that didn't need to be said. I didn't stop. I couldn't. That smile was enough. The road ahead opened up, lined with sunlight and the shimmer of heat on the asphalt. I kept driving, but something in me felt lighter. Later that night, sitting alone in my apartment, I poured myself a cup of tea, the same kind she used to make, and let the silence stretch. I realized I didn't miss her in a painful way. What I missed was the feeling she brought out in me, the calm, the stillness, the reminder that connection doesn't always need to be claimed to be real. Some people come into your life quietly and leave the same way, without promises, without confessions, and still, they change everything. She was that kind of person. I never went back after that. Never called, never wrote. But every time I passed a small garden in the sunlight, or heard the sound of rain on an old porch roof, I thought of her. And I understood then, we don't always keep people in our lives. Sometimes, we just keep the feeling they left behind. If this story touched something quiet inside you, tell me what part stayed with you the most. And don't forget to subscribe. We've got more stories that remind you how love can change us, even when it doesn't last.